Hi there, homespun friends, and thank you for coming back as we continue to examine the life of Ruth. Now, this book in the Bible could very easily be called Naomi because so much of this book is about Naomi and about her brokenness and her distress over the death of her husband and her two sons. Now she has moved back home. She has come from the land of the enemy in Moab. She's bringing home her daughter-in-law, who is a Moabitess, and she's bringing her with her to Bethlehem, where they are going to live now. And we know that the town greets her so excitedly when she comes in. They're very happy to see Naomi. And yet she tells them, "No longer call me Naomi, but call me Mara, because God has dealt bitterly with me." So she is heartbroken over her losses and her grief, and she cannot hardly see a way to overcome her sadness. But God has great things in store. So we move on to chapter 2, and we see that now there was a wealthy and influential man in Bethlehem who was named Boaz, and he was a relative of Naomi's husband Elimelech. One day Ruth the Moabite, now Ruth is always referred to as Ruth the Moabite in the earlier parts of this book because she was a foreigner. She was a person that was considered from enemy territory. And so she was called Ruth the Moabite. And she says to her mother-in-law, "Let me go out into the harvest fields where they are harvesting barley, and let me go behind the harvesters and pick up the scraps that are left over. And in this way you and I can have something to eat." And so Naomi gives her agreement to that. She says, "Okay, go ahead." And so Ruth went out and she began to gather the grains in a field. And as it just so happened, the Bible says, it just so happened, how many things in life work out like that for us? It just so happened that she found herself in the field that was owned by this very wealthy and influential man named Boaz, who was a relative of her father-in-law. And she found herself in the field there, gathering the grain. And about that time, Boaz comes into town. He has been away, and he comes into town, and he goes over to his field, and he sees all these people harvesting. And he spots Ruth right away. And so he greets his workers, and he says, "God bless you all." And they say, "God bless you." And then he goes to his foreman, and he says, "Who is this lady over here? Who does she belong to?" And the foreman says, "That is Ruth. She is from Moab, and she is the daughter-in-law of Naomi. And she came earlier today and asked me, would I allow her to walk behind our harvesters and pick up the scraps off the ground, so that she and Naomi could have something to eat. And she has been working hard all day, and she's only taken one short break." And so Boaz goes directly to her, which I find kind of remarkable, because in this day, women were not treated always with a lot of respect, and especially a foreigner from enemy territory. But Boaz goes directly over to her, and he tells her this. He says, "Listen, my daughter, stay right here with us while you gather the grains, and don't go to any other fields. Stay right here behind these young women that are working in my field. You see which part of the field that they're harvesting, and you go with them wherever they go. And I have warned the young men that work here not to mistreat you. And if you are thirsty, you help yourself to the water that they have drawn from the well for my workers." Well, Ruth was overwhelmed. She fell to her feet, fell to her knees at his feet, and she thanked him. And she told him, "What have I done to deserve such kindness? I am only a foreigner." And he said, "I know that you are, but I also know everything that you have done for your mother-in-law on behalf of your husband since he died. I have heard how you left your father and your mother and your land, and you have come here to live among complete strangers. I pray the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, will reward you fully for what you have done." And here we see the character of Boaz, where he invokes the name of his God, the God of Israel, and says, "I know who you are, and I pray God's blessings on you, that he will reward you for being a faithful daughter-in-law." Of course, Ruth continued to be amazed, and she said, "I hope I will continue to please you, sir. You have comforted me because you have spoken kindly to me, even though I'm not one of your workers." Now, when it got time to eat a meal together, Boaz called Ruth over, and he roasted the grains over the fire, and he gave her plenty to eat. She ate so much that she was totally full, and yet there were leftovers. And then after that, she went out and continued to work for the rest of the day. The Bible tells us she worked hard all day long. And at the end of the day, she went over and took her barley to the side, and she beat out the grains, and it filled up an entire basket full. She carried it back into town to Naomi, and Naomi was waiting. And when Naomi saw the basket, she said, "Oh my goodness, who has been so kind to you? Who is it that let you have all of this grain?" And so she told her mother-in-law, "The man's name that helped me today is Boaz." And Naomi said, "May the Lord bless him. He showed kindness to us, and as well as your dead husband. You know, that man is one of our closest relatives. He is one of our family redeemers." Now, a family redeemer in biblical days played an important role. He was an important person. You often hear it spoken of as being a kinsman redeemer. In certain translations, it's called a kinsman redeemer, and you will hear that word. If you study the Bible, you will hear that word sometimes. And in those days, in order for families to continue on, they needed to have children. It was very important to have children so that land could stay within the family and money could stay within the family and the family could prosper. That was the way that society was set up in biblical days. When a young man died and his wife had not borne any children, then it was quite possible that one of his relatives would marry his wife, and then the first son that they had would belong to him and would essentially be his child even though he was deceased. It's a little bit hard for us to understand, but that was the custom of the day. And this kinsman redeemer was highly respected because he was a man who would take this woman as his wife, and he knew that the son that he had with her would really be his dead relative's son. And all of the land she brought with her to the marriage, or any inheritance she brought with her to the marriage, that would all be saved and passed down to her son on behalf of her dead husband. So a kinsman redeemer had a precious place in the family. He helped the family to be able to keep the land within the family and to prosper the family. And so we learn that because Boaz is a relative of Elimelech, that he can be a kinsman redeemer for this family. And that was very important. That will be very important in the days to come as we continue to study Ruth. And Ruth was amazed that Boaz had been so good to her and bragged on him to Naomi. And so Naomi continued and said, "Do just as this man has told you, my daughter. Stay with his workers and do as he has said." And then Ruth told her, "Look, he told me more. Not only did he say that I could, work all day today, but he told me to continue to come back. He wanted me to work the entire barley harvest until it's over." So this meant that they were going to be able to store up some grain for their future. They were going to be able to have a little bit of security, all because of Boaz. So Ruth did just what Boaz had suggested. She followed his leadership. And she went out to his fields, and she gathered the grains until the end of the barley harvest. And then she continued on working with them through the wheat harvest in early summer. So not only did she partake in working in the barley harvest, she continued on working the wheat harvest as well. And all the while that she worked, she lived with her mother-in-law. So she is being a faithful daughter-in-law. She is being like a daughter to this woman. She is going out every day. She's working with the women in the fields, and she is taking home her portion of the grains and allowing them to store up some food and have a little security for the future. And we see in this chapter the introduction of Boaz. a wealthy, influential man who is eligible to be a family redeemer for Ruth and for Naomi. So that is the end of chapter 2. What an exciting chapter it is as we begin to recognize that God is bringing a plan together. He has a plan. Now, Ruth and Naomi really can't see the plan fully. They are trusting God day by day. I can guarantee you that there are days when Ruth and Naomi are probably a little uncertain about what their future will look like. They might be worried about whether they'll have the security that they need with just two women. They were very vulnerable. But God was already working out a wonderful plan, not only for Ruth, not only for Naomi. He was working out a plan for thousands and thousands of people to come, including his own son, Jesus Christ. This story gets so good, I just can't wait to tell you the rest of it, for us to spend time together sharing it. Friends, be sure to come back for chapter 3. See you soon. Bye-bye.